Skip that bit. Hello. My name's Melanie, as you know. I work at Rightmove. I am a product development team lead, which is an odd job title, but essentially I'm a product manager with line management responsibility for developers and the development team, so BAs and QAs and back-end, front-end developers, and a few bits of project management, other things thrown in, so it's kind of like a way of spreading the product manager role slightly, I suppose. Rightmove, if you don't already know, is a property portal. It's one of the top 10 searchable websites in the UK. Last year there were 207 billion minutes spent on Rightmove, so it's a fairly busy website, it's quite popular. I work on the consumer side of things, so the actual website that you may have used, there's more to the company than that. And mainly I focus around the kind of core flow of the site, so people coming in to search for properties and sending leads to agents. I've worked in product for a little over 12 years. I fell into it. I left university with a computing degree and someone said, do you want a job? And I took the first job they gave me, which was a marketing assistant, I think. After a couple of months, their product manager left and they said, hey, you know about websites? Want to be a product manager? I was like, sure, you're going to pay me more money? This is fine, I'll take it. No idea what the role was. I'm not sure anybody knew what the role was. It was just a title they'd given. So I wouldn't say I necessarily did that job especially well. What I kind of figured out was that my role was to try and work out what we should be doing next. And that was about as much as I understood at that point. Since then, I've worked from a startup with 8 people sat in a room, or a finance startup, to TfL, which is 27,000 people. So lots of different sized companies. I worked for a gambling company for my sins with Christine, just to shame her too. I've worked on websites, I've worked on apps, I've worked on databases with no front end, CRMs, risk systems, so like a whole host of various things. I like to say it's completely by design that I've managed to work on a completely separate set of things, but actually I think it's design and luck, because what I believe is that once you develop your skills in product, you're able to apply them into any kind of product. You don't have to kind of stick to the same thing. Having said that, the first time I moved away from working on a website, I was terrified. So each of the companies I've worked at have been quite varied. Some of them have had their dedicated UX teams, some of them have had no UX teams, some of them have looked incredibly shocked when you mention the word user to them. So there's been a kind of a general theme, not a lack of theme across all the companies I work for, sorry. As well as working in product, I somewhat randomly spent 2 years as a secondary school computing teacher in the middle. I thought, well, I've always wondered what it's like. I'll go and be a computing teacher. Hated it. Came back to product. But one of the things I really liked about it when I was doing it was that I had to take complex things, that's computing for secondary school students, and teach a room of 30 people how to do something. So I had to take a complex problem of introducing programming, and you had a kid in the room who would go home at the weekend, build an app, come back in, do way more than I could do, shame me in front of the class, and a kid who could kind of turn on the computer but didn't really know much more beyond that. And trying to break things down into a small enough chunk so that it was interesting and engaging for everybody in the room, especially, was something that I developed. I thought was a really useful skill, or I found it useful. So the other thing I've made a note to say is that it means that you practice talking in front of large groups of people, and therefore you wouldn't be terrified by what's facing you. Didn't work at all, actually. So I'm here to talk about working with UX. I've got to say the title for the talk threw me slightly, even myself, because it was about applying UX into your product, and as a sentence I found that a difficult sentence, actually. So I was merrily going along writing what I was going to talk about, and I thought, let's just make sure I'm actually talking about the thing people want to hear about. So I did a bit of user research, and I messaged a whole bunch of people that I know who work in product UX and said, if you saw this title and this description, what would you think I was going to talk about? And there were kind of two themes. One was, what is UX? Why should I care about it? Why should I be thinking about it every day? What are you talking about? Kind of that side. The other side was, I work with the UX team now, it's not really working, I don't really understand how to make it work, don't really know what they're doing, how can I make it better? And because there were two things, I'm going to try and talk about both a bit. I was going to gauge it later, but just out of interest, how many people here have a UX team where they work already, if you well, aside from my team who are at the back of the Okay, so not many people, I think. Didn't look like a lot of people. Okay, so maybe talking about both is going to work. I need to stop putting my trousers up, sorry. I'm trying to avoid doing that continuously. So, by the end of this, hopefully, we'll talk about why understanding your users is key. The fact that there's room for both UX and product. If you have a UX team, what you need to start with around trust and respect. If you don't have a UX team, that's fine. Here are some techniques that you can use and some things you should try to concentrate on. So that's the aim of this. I have brought some post-it notes because I love them, and pens with me, and if you'd like to give me feedback at the end and say, Melanie, you didn't do any of those things, that's fine too. I'd really appreciate any feedback, so they're on the table. So, before I dive into UX, having just explained about myself, I'm going to also go off into another angle slightly. I wanted to talk about my approach to product management or product leadership, maybe just to give some more background information or some context to what I'm talking about. I'll start by admitting I hate the word manager or management. I think it's because it kind of brings up in my mind a really old school kind of interpretation of the word. I think it's wrongly interpreted quite often. It can be applied in the wrong way. You quite often read product blogs and books that talk about product managers being the CEO of their product, and I think it, in my mind, conjures up lots of tiny mini dictators, just command and control, telling everybody what to do. And so I try to kind of avoid that way of talking about it. That's not to say all CEOs are mini dictators, by the way. That is wonderful, but yeah, it's the kind of what it brings up. So I lean towards leadership. So when I start thinking about leadership in general, we're doing a training course at work at the moment on leadership, and we had, unsurprisingly, as part of the session, we had to talk about what we think leadership is. So everyone was talking about, it's about inspiring people, it's about taking people on a journey, it's about loads of positive things, which it is. And then the more we talk, people said, oh, it's about having difficult conversations, it's about making decisions when nobody else will. And some of the slightly harder parts came out. And actually, I think all of the things that, if you are a line manager, and you are, the term manager is in your role, you are also trying to do the things difficult and not so difficult parts of leadership. So I think it's, I don't know, I prefer leadership. I do appreciate that it, can I swear on this? I do think it sounds a little bit wanky when you say leadership or leader, but I think it sounds less dictatorial than manager. So I guess it's something in the middle of the two. So I wrote kind of what I think, if you work in product management or leadership, what you're there to do. And I wrote some note cards for this, which I decided to ditch because I thought I'd just throw them around. And I've just put few and then started to describe this, which is, I think when you work in product leadership, it's your responsibility to lead others and find the best solutions to the most difficult problems, ideally having the biggest impact at the smallest cost. And you're there to inspire people, to draw the best out of people, and to provide a balance across lots of different disciplines. And that in itself is a real skill, and I think it's really undervalued. So I think that when you describe that to somebody, it can sound quite terrifying, but I think people don't always realise the skill that's involved in just being able to lead others and inspire them, and also to be able to provide that balance. Going about all of those things is particularly difficult, and trying to identify what you're going to do next can be quite hard. But I think there's a few things you can do to make it easier, and that's where the UX bit comes in. I'm not just going to carry on rambling. So I don't know how many people in the room might have a development background or technical, but more often than not, you don't find that you have to know how your solution is going to be built when you work as a product manager. But so often people feel like they definitely have to know every other part of it. It's like you can let go of the thing you don't know, but the thing that's right in front of you is the thing that you feel you should be able to control. So you should know every single thing from your users, everything about your business. Actually, it's okay to rely on other people and to take knowledge from other people. Most people wouldn't technically know how to build it, and that's fine. So that didn't neatly lead on to UX as I was hoping it was going to, but onto the UX side of things. So what do I mean by UX? I'm going to start by saying I'm not a UX expert myself. I've worked in product for 12 years, but I've worked with UX experts for a long time. I know a few of them. So when I said I was doing this talk, as well as checking what people thought I was going to talk about, I also went and said, how do you describe what your role is? How do you describe UX to anybody? And obviously I have access to Google, so I had a bit of Googling. What does Google say UX is? Interestingly, and perhaps not at all surprisingly, and probably quite importantly, there isn't an agreed definition of what UX is at all. You can find many, many different definitions of what it is. So I nicked a couple, which I've linked to where I stole them from. With the slides, I think you'll be able to get a copy of them at the end. I've put links to everything that I've used in here and further research and stuff if you want to look at it. But so, one definition, UX design is a commitment to building products with the customer in mind. Another one, UX design is the art and science of generating positive emotions through product interactions. Quite like that one. Or UX design is the process of designing a solution that considers all the needs of the user. So they're three. There are masses. You search UX online and find a million different things that it is. I think the key thing for me that I realised when I came away from this is that when you shorten something to an acronym and you say UX, it kind of loses its meaning. It really is as simple as user experience. You are thinking about your users with what you're doing. People, I think, kind of lean towards it being design. The fact that those definitions are design written in every single one of them doesn't help with that. But I think the assumption is that it's about what the front end is going to look like. It's much more about the colours and the imagery in people's minds. But actually UX is about user behaviours. Yes, the interface design, but also the user needs, the information architecture, the content, the research that's been done. It's a huge discipline in itself. I'm not going to derail this talk by trying to explain everything about UX. I'm still going to focus on it from a product point of view. But it's the fact that the understanding that it goes beyond just what does something look like. It's more about how you actually use it. So hopefully we've got it. It's a whole discipline. I'm telling you that it's a huge amount of work and that you have whole teams dedicated to it. So why should you be thinking about it in your role every day? Quite simply, I'm assuming that the products that you work on are going to be used by somebody. So you probably need to think about their experience of it. I've got here a quick poll, but I've obviously already asked who's got a UX team. But really, especially given that most of you said you don't have a dedicated UX team, if you're not thinking about your users in what you're building, you're potentially just building stuff that you think is right, which is a bit of a worry. So I've got some examples of things like poor UX. There are masses. If you search poor UX online, obviously you'll find millions and millions and millions of examples. One of my favourites is that Sega created a games console that was also a phone, and it looked like it was from the late 90s, and you could hold onto it and you could play games. They made it so you had to remove the battery from the phone to change the game, which is a kind of not the most useful phone feature in the world. Also, the microphone and the speaker were on the side of the phone, the handset, so you kind of have to hold it at a funny angle to be able to actually use it as a telephone. So it was kind of like someone going, I know, we'll just slap these two things together, let's not think about how anyone's going to use it, we'll just make it. And one of the classic ones is doors, so a bit like the doors that here where you've got a handle and then they've got a push sign written above it. So you walk up and you're not quite sure what thing you're supposed to be doing. They kind of just throw you at it with a door immediately. So there's masses of them. People often talk about things like seatbelts when they were first created and they were tested on male crash test dummies, and then as soon as we started using them, they weren't the right size, that kind of thing. So quite simply, you need to be thinking about it because you need to think about your users. It's kind of a no-brainer in my mind. Okay, so you're sold. Hopefully, you need to care about user experience, but then it's how. So how do you go about actually doing it? Hopefully, this is where it gets a bit more interesting if it's not already fascinating. So don't have a UX team. That was quite a lot of people in the room. Actually, most places I've worked, particularly smaller places, haven't had a UX team, or if they have, they definitely haven't worked on any internal systems. So when I worked for the gambling company, I was the product owner for a system called Alpha, which was the back end of this gambling giant. There was kind of 3 companies. They had about 20 million players' details in the database. It was CRM, an affiliate marketing tool, a game management tool, a gifting system, a risk management tool. I mean, it's everything you could possibly do to run a gambling company, someone has shoved into one system. And it was definitely made by developers for developers. It was a group of people, it was even a group of people based in London, and everyone who used it, mostly based in Cape Town. So everyone in London sat in a room and went, right, how are we going to build this system? I know what it's got to do. And you'd look at this thing, and there were 1,000 things on the screen everywhere. It was so confusing, it was impossible to use. Christine's nodding her head, Christine had to use it for a while. It was a nightmare, but it was an example of where we didn't have a UX team and we just got merrily off on our way thinking we knew what people actually wanted from us. So, first thing, might seem obvious, who are your users? It's a terrible icon for users, they look more like bowling pins, but it was late, my mum's doing it. Who are your users? When I worked at Transport for London, we decided in our infinite wisdom that we would create a content strategy for the entire TfL website. If you can imagine how big the TfL website is, that was a terrible idea. It's probably one of the worst things we've ever come up with. It never actually got written, it was far too complicated. But we started off by saying, okay, let's talk about who our users are. So about 6 or 7 of us sat in the room, content editors, product managers, head of UX I think was in the room, and we said, right, let's just sit here and write out all the users we can think of. There's a blank wall. And with my love of post-its, we put post-its up on the wall. We got through 3 packets of post-it notes before we realised we really had to stop. There were too many people. And there were a couple of really interesting things that came out about it. One is a fairly obvious thing, you can start to group people together, so you don't have to think about the parent that's commuting with a child versus the person that's commuting to work versus the child that's commuting to school. You can start to think of them as commuters, or you could start to think of them as people with families using Transport for London, but you can start to group people into different things. You have people who are freight drivers using the website, but you start to group your users together and get a deeper understanding of who they are. But one of the key things that came out, and it's one of the key things to point out here, is that you are 100% not a user of your product, no matter how much you think you are. So I am currently looking to buy a new house, or my first house. Super excited, I'm using the Rightmove website. I still can't use my own use case of Rightmove to come up with ideas of how we should build it. I'm too ingrained, I'm on the inside. I'm tainted, I can't be trusted with my views. And it happens all the time. So some of my team are here actually, and we quite often in our planning sessions will have conversations of, well, I don't use my phone like that. But no one uses the phone the way you use the phone to use Rightmove, because you're on Rightmove 6 hours a day and you're building it. And I think quite often you can it happens all the time. I found myself doing it in a meeting this afternoon going, well, when I look for properties, this is what I do. But it's not about what you do or how you use your product, it's about how other people use your product. So it's key that you figure that out. And you figure it out, and if possible, this is the ideal thing, you speak to them. So if you can, get out and speak to them. Again, using Rightmove as an example, or TfL, based on where we are and based on the number of people that use Rightmove, we could just walk out the door of our office and talk to anyone on the street, and almost all of them are going to know what we're talking about. And if your product is something that people are using, that you could just do that, go and talk to people. The best interview I ever did, but I wasn't the interviewee. So the best interviewee I ever had, is that what I was saying it? Came in for a product role at TfL, and we'd set her a problem that she had to try and kind of come up with a plan, a solution and a roadmap. And she walked in and she had these massive boards with her. It was absolutely amazing. I was super excited when she walked in. And she came in and she said, right, so I've been going and standing in tube stations for the last few days and talking to complete strangers and asking them about their problems. And it was the best thing anyone had ever done in an interview to me, because she hadn't gone, this is how I use it. She'd gone and actually spoken to people and hadn't made that assumption. And it's really, really key that you do it. Using Alpha as the example again, we did eventually, when we started working on it more, go to Cape Town and sit with the users of the system and understand how they're doing it and take phone calls. But if you're not doing that, how can you assume you know how someone's doing it? And actually really embed yourself. Another example of knowing your users, I was talking to our head of UX this week about the fact I was doing this talk, and I don't know how, gambling came up again. It seems to come up around me. But she said, oh, gambling sites are usually made by people who use them, and it's really easy. They just make what they're used to using themselves. You can tell that by the way they're made. But actually, one of the key things again I learned when I was at that company was One of the websites that we built were bingo sites. It was like a set of them. Bingo users don't think of themselves as gamblers. They think of themselves as bingo players, or even more, they think of themselves as people who are going onto websites to socialise with people, and there's a bingo game on the side of it. So if you build something for people who want to play bingo, you're not going to get the people that are actually using your site. You need to think about why people are there in the first place. Which leads me quite nicely onto experience maps. Very bright. Do any of you use experience maps now? Good, that makes me feel better. Only because it means no one's going to tell me I'm wrong. So when I first saw one of these, I actually saw an entire wall covered in post-it notes. I walked into the UX team I was working with at the time, running around grinning and was super excited, and I was like, what the hell is that? This is terrifying. If you have a UX team, go on to that, they'll probably be making these, and or if they're not, you should ask them to. They're super helpful. But what this does is it's about the full experience that somebody's having. So it's a visual representation of what your users do, what they're thinking, and how they feel over time. And it doesn't start with your product. It starts with when they start to need to use something that your product might fulfill. So to give you an example, I might be talking to a friend on the phone and say, I should come and visit you. Come and visit you next week. That's the beginning of my experience of going, I want to go there. Then I start to go, okay, well, so they live in South East London. Great. Do I know how to get to South East London? Oh yeah, I think I go on that tube or that tube. Maybe I want to check if that's right. Maybe I'll plan my journey. I could use a tube map to do that. I go to the station and ask somebody. I could go onto a website and use their journey planner. Once I've worked out what my journey is, then I can go and do my journey. Then I'll get to the end of that. And the experience map will capture the whole thing, not just the bit of journey planner. And one of the reasons why it's key is because when you start to do this, you start to map it out. I'm kind of talking in a roundabout way, I'll explain this better in a second. When you start to map out the whole kind of experience as one, you actually start to see where there are holes, or where there are problems, and where you can actually start to solve some of these problems. In an ideal world that very few of us live in, you'd do this, and you'd go, there's a hole there, we should create a product that meets that gap. I don't know very many people that live in a world where someone just says to them, here's a blank canvas, build whatever on earth you want. But what this does allow you to do is go, what's someone's entire experience, and then map your product onto that. So if you were to take the experience I just said, about I want to go there, the journey planning part of TFL could obviously form one of the solutions of that. And then you can start to go, okay, well, is there anything wrong within journey planner? Are there kind of negative feelings within this experience that we could actually still help within journey planner? Or is it about journey planner does exactly what it should do within this section, let's build it out further? Or is it already does what it's supposed to do, I don't need to build anything else, let's solve a different problem. But it actually allows you to see what the problems are. I promised myself I wouldn't say this sentence, but I am going to say it. It allows you, no I'm not, yeah. Low-hanging fruit. It highlights, I hate it, highlights low-hanging fruit, easy wins, whatever, however you want to call them. You're able to see really easily, these are some problems we can quickly solve, while we also figure out what the bigger problem is. So you start by the different stages within the experience. And then you start talking about what the objective is. So for this, it's buying, and then it's arranging a delivery, arranging a discount, paying for washing machine. Again, this is on a Medium article, which he explains in a lot of detail exactly how to build every single part of this up. So I'm not going to try and explain the whole thing, but you start talking about what the stage is, what the objective is, and then what the behaviours are that somebody's doing within this, and then what the positive and negative feelings are around that. And then you're able to say, so this one is annoyed at slow service, they're not sure if the transaction is safe, they're annoyed at the delivery hours, and then you can start to go, okay, well, what can we do about that? How can we solve that? And you do that across the whole stages. On this slide in the presentation, there's actually, I put 4 links in of different ways you can do these. Of course, like everything, they can look different depending on which blog you read and how you look at it, but the whole point of it is that you're thinking, what's somebody doing at this point, what are they trying to achieve, and what's good and bad about it, and that you're thinking beyond what your product does. If you only ever work within your product world, how do you know if you're really solving the problems that people are having? You're just solving the problems someone's having in your product specifically, not the wider thing. You can't go beyond that. So this is probably one of the most powerful things I think most people could use. And if you know your users, you're able to kind of talk to them and ask them about their positive and negative feelings, and you can help yourself fill these in. So it's kind of a chicken and egg, so what comes first? I would say we kind of do them in tandem. So you kind of figure out who your users are, as much as possible, get them in, find out what their thoughts are, talk to them about, how did you feel then, how did you feel now. If you don't have access to, I don't know what people's products are, so you don't have access to people very easily, as much as I'm saying you're not a user, there is still benefit in being able to draw a line in the sand and just say, this is what I know right now. So if you don't have access to people, if you can't figure this stuff out straight away, it's okay, as long as you don't pin this up on the wall and make the entire company sign it in blood, this is the perfect experience map. It's starting to work towards thinking about the whole experience. So really talk to your users and create these maps. And then the other thing is about, I've set who sets the bar, and I've put on my notes competitor analysis, but actually I mean more benchmarking. And I don't mean who else builds the thing that you're building. Or we could say, okay, we have a search that people are using to find properties. Who else does that? Or we could look at Airbnb, we could look at booking.com. Or we could go one step further and say it's a search. So how do Amazon do things? How do e-commerce sites, other e-commerce sites do things? How does Google work? You don't just have to work within the sphere of your product, because what's happening is that other people are setting the bar, even not within your sector. So, funny enough, we were in a meeting about this afternoon, so I'm probably going to contradict some of the stuff we say. It's not just about what other property companies do, because then you're just just self-fulfilling. You're just all copying each other and trying to do the same thing, and not thinking about your users and not thinking about their experience, and you're just going down a hole and you're not thinking about the whole picture. So one of the key things you need to do is look at how other people do what they're doing. And some of these things seem obvious because people do it. Then they go, I've looked at this site and I don't like it. But actually you need to figure out before you go and look at what you're going to look at. So don't just sit and open up a website and click through it and go, yeah, I don't really like the layout, don't like the colours, that's pretty cool, I'll do that. You need to think beforehand, what am I going to go and research? So am I going to go and look at how they've implemented their sorting? Or we recently put keywords onto the site. Maybe I'm going to go and look at how they use keywords within their website and what they do with it. It depends on your product. Some things, if they're back-end systems, it's a bit harder to go and look at other people's. But still, what are other people doing? You need to define beforehand. And then when you're going through the systems or the sites or whatever you're looking at and you're making notes, you see something that's super exciting, you think, oh my god, I want to go down that rabbit hole now. Just make a note of it, put a pin in it, and carry on doing your research and going through in that way. Figure out, I'm saying the same thing basically, but figure out beforehand what you're going to look at and stick to that and compare across several places. So we're looking at kind of benchmarking, competitor analysis at the moment, and we had a conversation last week, I think, about what things to look at on other people's sites, and we agreed up front, so okay, this is what we want to focus on with this bit of research. The key thing with all three of these, so benchmarking, the experience maps, and the users, and the thing that even if you do all of these already, that lots of people forget to do, is that you have to go back to them. So you don't just one time go, this is my experience map, or this is my benchmark, or these are my users. You need to go back, and are the users still the same? They're who they were before? What are other people doing? Constantly websites are changing, they're building different things. If you're not on the ball, you're not looking at what other people are doing, you could suddenly find yourself in a position where someone releases a new iPhone and your phone is completely useless if you're Nokia. So you need to be thinking about what other people are doing and doing it constantly. So they're kind of three relatively simple, although I admit that this is fairly time consuming, but relatively simple techniques that allow you to really start thinking about your users properly. Once you've gone through here and you've identified what the problems are, and you've gone, okay, we're going to try and solve these, and we know who our users are, and we know what the bar is, and you can then come away with your problem statement of we want to solve this problem that people are having. Then as a team, you can start to come up with what the solution might be because you have a full picture. If you try and solve the problem without knowing who you're solving it for, or really how that problem fits into everything else, and having an idea of how other people might do it, you're kind of just taking a stab in the dark at what you should be doing. So you need to think about all three of those things. So the flip side of that is if you have a UX team, and they're already doing a bunch of these stuff. So I'm going to put it out there. I haven't always had the best relationships with every UX team I've ever worked with. There have been some clashes. some fairly massive ones. I spent 4 hours locked in a room with our head of design about 6 months ago, just scribbling over each other's work, disagreeing with each other and saying, no, I get to make these decisions, and we went round and round in circles, and it was a nightmare. Because we didn't do the one thing I'm going to say that you need to do, which is well, there's two things you start with. One is you start with positive intent. If you assume that everybody who you're working with is trying to achieve the same goal as you, which you'd hope they probably are, you're probably in a good place. So start with that. Then start talking about trust and respect and thinking about where people are experts. So I've just given you a bunch of techniques that could help you in your product roles. If you then suddenly found a UX expert joined your company, you don't have to go, this is my experience map, and I own it and it's mine. Go, brilliant, you're an expert at this. Help me, make it better, take it further, let me learn from you. So really it's about just start by understanding other people's disciplines and respecting that they have expertise and allowing them to free up more of your time to go and do more of the benchmarking or understanding more about your users or understanding your business problems. I don't think you'll ever be in a position where everybody's doing so much stuff that you have nothing left to do. If you already work in product, you probably know that you don't have a huge amount of spare time that often. So start with the respect, find common ground, share tools. So the experience map, that experience map when you create one should be on the wall for everyone to see, not on a computer hidden away that no one can look at. Stick it on the wall if you can. Get everybody around it, the developers in your teams, anyone that's around. Make sure everybody sees what the whole experience is for everyone around them. Know your weaknesses. So if you're not great at creating experience maps, you find it difficult to go and benchmark things, you're not so keen on going and talking to users, whatever it is, know what those are and be okay with that. It's fine to not know everything and to say to somebody, I don't know how to do that, can I learn from you? It's only going to better you, but more importantly, it's only possibly going to better your product. Because that high-pitched noise is distracting me very much, sorry. One of the key things, remember that you're a team. Again, positive intent, you're all there to work towards the same thing. Sometimes you find people kind of, well, that's my job. And half an hour arguing about whose job it is. It doesn't matter, as long as you're doing it by the end of it, who cares really? And it's about balancing, which is one of the key skills you're ever going to have when you work in product, balancing things out. That same head of design that I spent 4 hours arguing in a room about a piece of work with, her and I spent a lot of time doing exactly this, sitting down and going, so what exactly do you do? And what exactly do you do? Well, I like that bit of your job, and I like that bit of your job, and maybe I could learn more from you here, and maybe you could teach me about something, and really kind of getting to know each other and understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses, and then learning more about each other's teams and how maybe our teams can work together. And what's the end result of that is that we've gone from arguing each other and being incredibly uncomfortable to more recently coming up with a strategy for how we're going to change the way that we have a whole entire roadmap for the whole of our product development department, how we might go about improving the way that we're working. And that means we've sat and stood in the room, instead of scribbling each other's work out and being quite mad at each other, we're like, what about this idea? What do you think about this? I like that you have this way of talking. I like that you come up with this. And we've actually kind of managed to find a way that we work together because we've learned to respect each other. It's kind of that simple. We've not kind of panicked about it. And one of the things that we did last week, I think, actually, so one of the development teams, is we started to talk about roles and responsibilities and relationships between them and who does what. So one of the teams I work that I manage has got a tech lead, a business analyst, some Java developers, a JavaScript developer, a QA, some are in the room, I'm hoping I'm not missing anybody out. We also have UX and UI designers that we work with, and a principal UX lead, I think his role is something along those lines. Which I should remember, but he sometimes gets it wrong too. Not everyone in the room knew what each other's jobs were. We've been working together for a while, like a good 8 months probably. So we just sat down and said, okay, quickly make a note of what you think each other's jobs are, keep it yourself, don't worry about sharing it with the room. And then I swapped people around a little bit strategically and said, write down what the person to your right's job is. What do you think they do? What are their key deliverables? What are their goals? What is it you think that they do for a job? And then also, what do you think they need to be able to do that job? What are their kind of personal attributes and also kind of actual artifacts that they need? Do they need a vision? Do they need a a problem statement? Do they need Jira tickets? So what is it that they need to be able to do what they're doing? And then also define it for yourself. So define the person to write, define it for yourself. And then we put them up on the wall around the room, and everyone went around and read what each other had said. So the interesting thing then is whether or not everybody thinks you do the job that you do, if anyone has a clear understanding. Actually, thankfully, it was fairly well understood, apart from the fact that pretty much everybody in the development team thought that the UX and UI designer did the same job. And actually everyone was a bit surprised that they had different roles, and they were surprised that we didn't realise they did different jobs, but they just come as a team. Right? We just assumed they just did the same thing all the time, and that was it. And it was really interesting, because then it was suddenly an appreciation for, oh, so you go and do this research, and you actually do the design side of things, and you're more the interface, and you're more the kind of who the users are, you're the how, and suddenly you've got a much better appreciation for what each other are doing. And actually, in that conversation, we ended up talking about what the QA in our team does, which is also a key kind of thing. So even within our own team, we weren't totally sure of what everybody was doing. The next thing we did is this kind of map, which is, you can't really see, but we wrote out each of the roles, and then drew out what the kind of key relationships are. Obviously, if you wrote every relationship, you'd hope there's a line between every single role. But the key ones, so obviously between the UI and UX designer, there's a fairly key link. Between where we work, the team lead, me, and our business analyst, or between the tech lead and the UX lead. So we started to, what are the kind of key roles there? And then from that said, okay, another business buzzword, what are the pain points that are there between the two roles? What don't you have? So I don't have an understanding of the technical background, or I have no idea what you do as a UX lead because it turns out you're not the same person I thought you were. Whatever it is, whatever your problems are, and then from that are able to go, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Actually ran out of time in that session, but what it would have been was, what are we going to do about those problems? What are we going to do to fix those pain points? And then you can come back and review those. And it means that everybody you're working with has a better understanding of what each other does. And it's amazing how much you learn from people if you do that. You kind of figure it out. The camera is very distracting. It's all right. So the only kind of the last bit I was kind of going to talk about product and UX together. I found it kind of when I did some of the research. It's one of the things that's always been I found difficult, and possibly the cause of so many of my not so good relationships in the past. When you start to actually have a look at product and UX online, you start to read about it and read about them working together, you'll find blogs that say things like, you don't need product managers anymore, UX leads can do everything. And then you'll have, what is this UX job? It's complete nonsense, I can do everything as a product manager. And then you'll have the different definitions, and there's all kinds of myths, I think, that go with what product is and what UX is and what the differences are. Like all good Venn diagrams and all good differences between roles, these can shift back and forth. It depends on who's there and whose their expertise are. If you are the only person, you don't have a UX person with you, then actually you probably are doing a lot of the things that a UX lead would do, but that doesn't make you a UX expert any more than if a UX person is there and there isn't a product person there, but they're a product expert. It just means that they're fulfilling that role when they need to. And the more people you have that are able to fill these roles, the more you can move apart in your roles. But there is always a crossover between the two, because you're always talking about what you're doing for your users and how you're making the best product. So there is always a crossover. But some of the myths I think we found that I found are that product decides what we do and everybody falls in line. I'd completely disagree. I think as product you're there to set the direction, and that's based on understanding your users, what the business wants, what's technically possible. But it's not just that you dictate, this is what we're building now, everyone fall in line. It's about setting the direction. Another myth that I get super hit up about quite often is that UX set the roadmap based on users and everyone does what they want you to do because it's all about the users. Also not true. My best example of that is that most users wouldn't want advertising on a website. Most companies need to have advertising on a website. So there has to be some kind of balance. If you are a UX lead, you might say, well, obviously we know that, so we're not going to suggest it, but it's more about that kind of balance between the two, and you don't want to only ever do what users want. You can, in the same way that if you just do what a developer wants, or you just do what the business person wants, you just do what I want, you could go down the wrong path. You could do the same thing if you only do what users want. It's about a balance. Another one that's a common myth that I've faced many times, and some of you may have as well, which is a roadmap will solve everything. Build us a roadmap, write us a roadmap, we'll know exactly what we're doing next. absolute nonsense. For a start, it depends what you mean by a roadmap, which is the thing that I'm not going to go into some kind of existential crisis about what we mean by roadmaps, but they can be very different things to different people. I walked into TFL and they said, "Hooray! You're going to build us a roadmap. All our problems are solved." I was like, "What do you think a roadmap is? This is terrifying." It wasn't what they thought it was at all. I think they were quite sorely disappointed actually. But yeah, roadmaps aren't going to solve everything, but they are a way to guide people along something. Another thing that an argument I've had with various people from all different areas is that developers don't need to be involved in the building of something until it's ready to be built. Also not true. Get your developers involved as early as possible. They need to understand how the users are. They need to understand what the problems are. Some of the best developers I've ever worked with, and some of them are here, are people who care about the users themselves. They're people who actually want to know what people are using something. So get them involved, because they're also very clever people who probably have very good ideas about how you can go about doing things. I can see someone at the back shaking their head at one of the developers in my team, which is like, well, I am talking about you. And the other thing is the one I said before, which is that UX leads and product managers do the same job. They're not doing the same job, but there are crossovers between the two. And as long as you acknowledge that and you find the boundaries around each other, you should be able to work pretty well together. And that's it. That's the end of my talk. So yeah, understanding your users is key. There's room for both disciplines, and as I said, it's kind of a moving target. If you have a UX team, start with trust and respect. It's the best thing that you could possibly do, and it's the best way to make it work. Don't have a UX team. Also fine, you can employ some of the techniques that I went through before. And like I said, there are slides that you guys will be able to see, and I've put links in there for how you can go away and research this in more detail and how to go about creating experience maps. I think if you can start with those three things, you're going to be in a really good place. You have a much better understanding. That's it.